Okay, guys, hey there. I'm gonna post something about this on Instagram real quick. So that people who are on Instagram they'll get to see. Maybe I'll do an episode of the Typical Nerdcast today. Maybe I'll join. I don't know, but we'll see. Just posting something right now. Then I'll get started. Why don't I talk about my introduction first? Alright, here's what I have to say. Okay, so about a year ago, I did a video right before Avengers Age of Ultron came out, and in that video, I ranked every Marvel movie from the very worst to the very best. And I was only able to work with any movie from Iron Man to Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, now it's a year later, and Captain America Civil War is about to come out. So I thought I'd rank, and now I have, I get to work with, I get to work with Avengers: Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. So I thought I'd be ranking every Marvel movie from Iron Man to Ant-Man from worst to best. So let's get started, shall we? Hold on, let me do screen share. All right. Can you guys see this? Okay, good. We are gonna get started here. If I can start, yep, from the beginning. Oh, okay. So yeah, this is the first movie that has the worst Marvel movie, the worst Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, in my opinion, is Iron Man 3. Now I know really like Iron Man 3. There's a whole camp of people that will go around defending this movie. And here's the thing, you don't have to agree with any of my opinions. You can look at every movie on the list and you can completely disagree. If I have a movie that's really low on the list, you can think to yourself, that's crap. I don't agree with it. I think that movie is great. Or you can look at any of the movies that are really high on my list and you could say, no, 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 that movie was terrible. What is he thinking? And feel free to leave your opinions in the comment section below. So yeah, feel free to express your opinions and have your opinions. But I have my opinions and I am going to express them, just as you can in the comment section below. The reason I hate Iron Man 3 so much, for multiple reasons. First of all, this movie is littered with plot holes. For example, when Tony dies, or supposedly quote unquote dies, there's a scene in the movie where the world thinks that Tony Stark is dead. And Tony Stark is a very famous person. Society doesn't seem to react to the fact that Tony Stark is dead at all. You'd think they'd have this huge Avengers, memorial. You'd think they'd have all the Avengers, sort of like with Death of Superman, where they have all the Justice League members come to his funeral. You'd think they'd do that, right? Nope, nope. They don't do that. They do not do that at all. No, nobody seems to react in any way to the fact that Tony is dead. Not even Rhodey, Tony's best friend, reacts to Tony's death, supposed death, while he's in the Middle East and Tony calls him. Um, and that's the thing. He's still doing his job. He didn't put work aside right after he hears that his best friend is supposedly dead. Yeah. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, you just hate this movie because of the Mandarin, right? Here's the thing. I'd be able to no, that's not true. There are other reasons why I hate this movie. Second of all, I'd be willing to let the Mandarin thing go if, here's the thing, if the Mandarin, let's say they did that whole thing, and Aldrich Killian, the guy who turned out to be the main villain, if he was great, let's say Aldrich Killian stole the show, let's say he was amazing, he was funny, he was likable, he was evil, maybe a little creepy here and there, but overall, a really good villain, really well done, and stole the show, then I could say, I'm sad that we didn't get the Mandarin, but at least we got this great Aldrich Killian guy. He's great, so I won't complain about that. That wasn't the case. Aldrich Killian was a horrible villain. A horrible villain. One of the worst villains in a superhero movie to date. And Marvel has had a problem with villains for quite a while. But Aldrich Killian may take the cake as possibly the worst villain, or maybe not the worst villain, but he might have been the worst villain in a Marvel movie. Followed immediately by Yellow Jacket and Ant-Man. But the thing is, he wasn't funny at all. And well, I don't think every villain needs to be funny. I think Ultron was funny and he didn't need to be funny. But the thing is, I could never sympathize with this guy. I really, really never could. Now, the better way they could have done this is, let's say, Aldrich Killian, because at the very beginning of Iron Man 3, Killian, we see a flashback to 1999, not the creepypasta 1999. We see a flashback to 1999 where Aldrich Killian meets Tony Stark, and he's really excited. He wants to show Tony his work, and Tony says, "Okay, meet me on the rooftop." He never meets Killian there. Now, let's say they had that at the beginning of the movie, and then let's say that Aldrich Killian, he grows up and he's really poor. He lives with his mom or whatever, and his dreams are ruined. But if he had only gotten to meet Tony, Tony might have looked at it. You know what? This is great. This is innovative. I want you to work for my company. And he really could have been successful. And Tony is the only chance he had, and now he's in a financial hole. And then we could say that, the Ten Rings, calls him up and says, "Hey, we heard about your Extremis project. We are interested, and we want you to use that to help us take down Tony Stark. And we'll give you this much money if you do it." That could be a real motivation. That could be a real motivation, but that's not what they chose to do. No, that isn't at all. There's no motivation whatsoever. I guess you might argue that maybe because he didn't get to meet Tony, he got to meet Tony. That's the thing. He didn't meet him on the rooftop though, which was a dick move of Tony. But at the same time, I guess you could argue that that's his motivation, the real reason why he hates Tony. But the thing is, real reason he hates. Why is he trying to kill the president? It makes absolutely no sense. And the thing about Killian, this is the problem with a lot of Hollywood movies nowadays. He just happens to have a connection with every important character in the movie. It's just like, okay, you just happened to meet Tony Stark. and then he just happened to be friends with Pepper, and then he just happened to have ties with the botanist that Tony was dating in 1999, Maya Henson. And he just happened to have formed the Ten Rings. And he just happened to be behind the Mandarin thing. Little coincidental. And if Tony was planning the house party protocol that whole time, why didn't he activate it when they were trying to blow his house up? Yikes. And second of all, why I'm not the first person to point this out, but maybe it's not the best idea to give your address to a terrorist and give your phone number to a terrorist. And first of all, I think if he did that, if a celebrity as big as Tony Stark, like if Charlie Sheen or Donald Trump or somebody like that did something like this in real life, immediately somebody wouldn't try to blow up his house. I think, and I don't think they blow up his. And that's another thing. I have no idea how they were able to plan that whole thing within a couple of hours. How the terrorists were able to plan, the whole thing with the helicopters in a couple of hours. It would have to have taken, at least a couple days to put that whole thing together, the helicopters and blowing up his house and everything. Another thing that doesn't, so there's that. But another thing, if Donald Trump or Zac Efron or Charlie Sheen or a celebrity or Kim Kardashian or a celebrity like that gave their address on live TV or national TV, they wouldn't have people trying to blow up their houses. They'd have the Chinese hacking them. Jesus Christ. Tony is worse when it comes to security or national security than Hillary Clinton is with her emails and her private server. So yeah, this movie really sucks. Also, it has no idea. It has no idea what it wants to be. In one way, it feels like it's trying to be a dark and gritty film about PTSD and our personal or our inside demons that we have to fight. But on the other hand, they oversaturate the movie with so much humor that it's even, I know a lot of Marvel movies have humor. I mean, even for this movie, even for a Marvel movie like this, it's really an overabundance of humor and comedy. So yeah, so really, it's like choose one or the other. If you want to be a really comedic and funny movie, be a really movie, cartoonish movie. If you want a dark and gritty movie, that's fine. A dark and gritty movie, not jokes here and there. My upcoming film and is a very, very. They're still uh, villain fight. The encounter between Jason Black and original came up with, and I think most of you will probably go out of it. So there's that. If this was a dark movie and they wanted to have, some funny moments here and there, that's totally fine. And if they wanted to make this a really cartoonish movie, that's fine too. Guardians of the Galaxy was a really cartoonish movie. Um, but there were some depressing moments in Guardians of the Galaxy. There were a few darker moments. But overall, it was a very cartoonish, funny movie. But this movie has no idea what it wants to be. God, I mean, it's like Feige, it's like Kevin Feige and Shane Black came into came into the workplace the next day, and maybe Kevin Feige said, "Oh, we want to make this really emotional and gripping movie," and Shane Black was like, "No, no, I want to make a really cartoonish movie." And they argued, and then it's like this was the result. I don't know if that happened, but it just feels like it. Second of all, this is one of the dumbest superhero movies I've ever watched. It feels like Shane Black went with the first draft, um, didn't didn't bother to look over anything, uh, didn't bother to look over his script to see if there were any mistakes in the plot or things that didn't really make sense that he needed to tie up. It's like he just was lazy. Um, and another thing, there was no need to be called Iron Man 3. This might as well have been called Marvel's Tony Stark because there was only one scene in the entire movie. I know there were a few scenes where Tony was, in armor as Iron Man, but there was only one scene with Iron Man where I truly felt like I was watching an Iron Man movie. And that was, or watching a movie with Iron Man. There was one movie that, there's only one scene that really jumped out to me, that really made me think this is an Iron Man movie. And that was the scene where everybody was falling out of the plane. That was really the only scene where I could look at and say, yep, this is an Iron Man movie. Aside from that, it didn't feel like an Iron Man movie at all. And it had absolutely, I understand and I respect the fact that they didn't just want to, oversaturate the movie with just, other references to other, Marvel movies, or just, full on, foreshadowing to, to other movies like the next Avengers or anything like that. I understand that this wanted to be a solo film, and I respect that. And I feel the MCU and Hollywood in general really needs to do more of that. If you look at Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, one of the main complaints that people have had, and one complaint that I had, was the fact that it just tried too hard to set up the Justice League. It felt like it wasn't taking its time. It felt like, because like it's fine if you want to set up your cinematic universe and you want to have references to another movie. That's fine. That's great. That's awesome. But first and foremost, you got to try and make a good movie. And I understand that Iron Man 3 was trying to do that. It said, you know what? Iron Man 2 was a movie that tried way too hard to set up the Avengers. We won't do this with Iron Man 3. We'll try and have our own solo movie. And I have a feeling at the first meeting, the first time that Kevin Feige and Shane Black met, they probably had a great idea for this movie. I have a feeling they probably had an idea which could have made this the definitive Marvel movie, which could have made it as good as The Winter Soldier, but it backfired. And you know what? This had no relevance to the MCU at all. Frankly, if you took this out of the timeline, if you took this out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline, the only show or movie, show slash movie that would be changed, that would be different, would be Agents of Shield. Because aside from that, Iron Man 3 was completely irrelevant to the timeline. the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every Marvel movie would stay exactly the same if this movie never existed. Um, for example, what movie was it? Like, and this was pointed out to me by a friend that this would have no relevance whatsoever, even if you took it out. And I said to him, I remember responding to him saying, "Well, look, I didn't like the movie, but I have a feeling that when Avengers: Age of Ultron comes out, because it hadn't come out yet, it will probably somehow tie into that." Well, guess what? Avengers: Age of Ultron didn't tie into this movie at all. It didn't. Here's the thing. It had nothing to do with it, meaning that this movie has absolutely no relevance whatsoever. And frankly, it's a shame that this was the first movie of Phase 2. It really set Phase 2. Marvel really got off on the wrong foot with this movie, I feel, when they were trying to kickstart Phase 2. And it had nothing to do with the storyline for Phase 2 whatsoever. Frankly, I think a better movie, I think kickstarted Phase 2 should have been Captain America the Winter Soldier. Captain America the Winter Soldier had relevance to the storyline, that unfolded in Phase 2. It set up the Avengers, but I think the reason they made this the beginning of Phase 2 is probably because, they said, well, we started the first phase for Marvel off with an Iron Man movie. Why don't we kick kick off the second Marvel phase with an Iron Man movie? Well, now they're having the third phase of Marvel movies with the Captain America movie, something they should have done with the second phase. And I haven't seen Civil War yet. It's gotten great reviews. I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to see Spider-Man for the first time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But you know what? From what I've seen in the trailer, it looks like that movie is going to have relevance to the storyline for Phase 3. It looks like somehow that is going to foreshadow Avengers Infinity War Part 1. This didn't foreshadow any movies whatsoever, and that's fine. That's great. But if you're gonna have if you're gonna have a movie that doesn't foreshadow any other movie, don't make it the beginning of a phase. You know. So that's pretty much all that I can think of at the moment. To complain about with Iron Man 3. I know I've probably been rambling about this one movie for so 11 more movies through, and I think I've been long enough. Let me just make. Okay, yeah, I'm not doing too bad on battery, but yeah, let's get to the next movie. The second worst Marvel movie, Thor: The Dark World. Oh God. So I was way too generous with this movie when I did my ranking last year. Here's the thing. Thor: The Dark World, in my opinion, 2013 was not a great year for Marvel. Okay, financially, maybe it was. Agents of Shield. If you guys haven't been watching recently, haven't because the ratings are pretty low. But I really suggest that you guys go and watch Agents of Shield because I think it's gotten. Um, Granted, this season so far it's taken a bit of a different direction, but I think that's good. It's more of a character-driven season. But at the time in 2013, when it first came out, Agents of Shield was critically panned by critics. The first season was, or at least the first part of the first season was, and that was the first Marvel show that took place in the MCU, and So yeah, it didn't really have the best first impression on viewers, especially in comparison to shows like um, Daredevil and Jessica Jones, both amazing shows, both phenomenal shows, really. Um, Now, I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s gotten better. I have friends who I know in real life who think it's gotten worse. But at the time, it was critically panned. And 2013 was also the year that Iron Man 3 came out. And it was also the year that Thor the Dark World came out. Now, here's the thing. When I first saw Thor the Dark World, I actually didn't hate it. I thought it was actually a really good film, and I thought this movie is really good. Yeah. Now I see that it really, really isn't. Um, there was no emotional attachment between any character and the viewer, aside from Thor's parents. I think Thor's parents and Loki, of course. I guess Thor and his relatives were the only characters who I personally felt any emotional attachment to whatsoever. And I defended this movie from a lot of critics when it first came out. But you know what, critics? I'd like to apologize because now I see exactly what you guys were talking about. This movie was bad. It was really, really, really bad. And here's the thing: I do think it was better than Iron Man 3. But here's the thing: like I said a little while ago, Iron Man 3 did not know what it wanted to be. It didn't know if it wanted to be a cartoonish, funny movie or an emotional drama or an emotional, how should I say it? Um, More of a psychological drama, I guess I should say. Part of it wanted to be a psychological drama. Part of it wanted to be, a comedy. It couldn't decide which one it wanted to be, and you got to choose one or the other. Thor the Dark World at least knew what it wanted to be, but I didn't like what it wanted to be. That's the thing. The thing is, you could tell that Thor the Dark World was trying to be a romantic comedy. Yeah. And because, right, guys, I mean, everybody, you and I just always, I always, ever since I was a child, I always thought, to myself, gee, it'd be great to have a Thor movie that was a romantic comedy. Who doesn't want to see a romantic comedy version of a Thor movie? Right, right. Said nobody. Said nobody. There's that. So I hated the romantic comedy aspect to it. Jane Foster, I'm sorry to every Jane Foster fan. I'm not a fan of Jane Foster. I'm amongst the camp of people that did not like Jane Foster. Um, who's never really liked Jane Foster in these films at all. Um, and uh, the villain was laughably bad. Oh my god. Uh, I cannot. This villain may have been as bad as Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin. I'm not saying the movie is anywhere near as bad as Batman and Robin, but I'm saying the villain may have been just as bad as Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze because both villains were laughable. The only difference is that Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze at least had some character development. Not only was Malekith the Accursed one of the most forgettable villains in a superhero movie, but he was also one of the most laughable supervillains. This was also the point where people started to question the way Marvel was handling their supervillains. And now, a lot of people have pointed out that the supervillains in all of these Marvel films, good at all. You don't feel any emotional attachment to any of these villains except for Loki, and we'll get to him. Don't you worry. And the worst part of it is that they completely wasted Christopher Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor. Yeah, in case you didn't understand, yeah, in case you guys, Christopher Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor from Doctor Who, plays the villain. Look at what happened when Netflix casted David Tennant as Kilgrave in Jessica Jones. Everybody freaked out. Everybody got excited because people that were fans of Doctor Who, they followed up on this stuff. And they freaked out when they saw him in Jessica Jones. But when fans, even Doctor Who fans, saw Christopher Eccleston in Thor the Dark World, they were completely unfazed. And you want to know why? Because the villain is so forgettable that you just completely forget about the fact that a guy from the most popular sci-fi show of all time is the main villain. And the whole concept of space elves trying to Kool-Aid into the sky. How how did a movie tell me, Hollywood, how does a movie sell little space shooting Kool-Aid into the sky? How on earth like that make $700 million plus at the box office? Tell me how. Now, granted, there were good things about this movie. Um, One thing that a lot of people really overlooked was the relationship between Thor and his father. I thought the relationship between Thor and his father was perfect, and I really hope they had a little bit of it in the first Thor movie, and they did really, really well with that. But they really pushed it even farther with this movie, and I thought it was perfect. If there was anything perfect about this movie, it was the emotional attachment between Thor's father and Thor. You know, Thor in the first movie, he strived to be king of Asgard. He strived to get off of Earth, and just so he could go back and he could be the king, and he could, prepare to one day be the king. Well, once he finally gets, the chance to take the position of King of Asgard, he doesn't want it anymore. He wants to go back to Earth. And his father, he doesn't really accept, he doesn't really give him his blessing, but at the same time, he's still proud of him and he's still proud of what he's trying to do. And that final scene, I thought was perfect. And another thing that was just perfect about this movie, to say Tom Hiddleston stole the show as Loki would be the understatement of the millennia. Loki was already a popular character, but this cemented his reputation as one of the greatest Marvel villains in a movie of all time. Loki was just perfect. There was absolutely nothing wrong with Loki in this movie. And I think most of the critics, here's the thing, if you read the reviews, even the biggest naysayers for this movie will tell you that Loki, there was absolutely nothing wrong with Loki in this film. Loki was the golden goose. He's cemented his role as the golden goose of Marvel in this movie. Um, I thought he was perfect. I thought he was funny. He was witty. He wants what's best for his brother, but at the same time, he also kind of wants what's best for himself. And you can kind of understand where he's coming from. Loki's a perfect villain. If only they could have more villains like Loki. So, yeah, Thor: The Dark World, not a great film, pretty bad film, but still a few not so bad things about it. Now, the next choice on this list, the third worst movie for me, it's probably going to get, a lot of dislikes. It's probably going to make people dislike this video. That's totally fine. And I'm sure people are going to start typing hate comments and everything, and that's fine. You are entitled, as I said at the beginning of this video, you are entitled to your own opinion. You do not have to listen to what I say. You don't have to take anything I say as your opinion. You don't have to accept anything that I say. In fact, I don't encourage you to just agree with me just for the sake of agreeing with me. I don't want you to jump on the bandwagon just because people like me are saying these types of things. I want you to formulate your own opinion. Um, so now if you do agree with me, that's great. But again, I want you to formulate your own opinion. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. And again, as I've said, I encourage people to express their opinions in the comment section below. But this movie was a movie that a lot of people loved. I did not love it. Um, and I'm going to say why. You feel free to express your opinion and have your own opinion, but I have my own opinions and I'm going to express them. So the next movie on this list, here we go. Ant-Man. Ant-Man was a fan favorite Marvel movie for most people. Not for me though. Now, here's the thing. After rewatching it a few times, I can see why people really, really like this movie. Ant-Man definitely. I mean, there were a lot of memorable scenes in Ant-Man, and I really liked. Unlike with Iron Man 3, well, Iron Man 3 didn't know what it wanted to be. Let's face it. Thor: The Dark World. Unlike with Thor: The Dark World, I actually liked what Ant-Man was trying to be. It was trying to be this heist espionage film, but at the same time, sort of being, kind of like a silly little film. Um, you know, and nothing. It's trying to be a simple, silly little film. That kind of, accepts the fact. Because let's face it, the concept sounds pretty silly. It's about a man who shrinks and talks to ants. Sounds kind of silly, and they accepted that. They accepted that. They said, this is a pretty silly concept, but you know what? That's what people loved about the comics. So we'll make it a silly little movie. I like that. But here's where I don't like Ant-Man. Here's why I don't like it. You could see the studio interference, and it was just dreadful to watch. What became of all the studio interference. For those who don't know, still at this point, Edgar Wright, the director of the phenomenal film Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and the director of a bunch of other great movies that I really, really love, was originally supposed to direct it. In fact, Kevin Feige has admitted on several occasions that the only reason that Ant-Man happened was because Edgar Wright came to them with a great idea. But sadly, they screwed him over. They said, we're going to go with our own opinion. We're going to go with our own plot. And you can't do crap about it. And I don't think they should have done that. And it took 12 years to do. And Edgar Wright stayed with them that whole time. But finally, they came up with an idea that Edgar Wright found so absurd. And this was only 2 weeks before filming began. They came up with an idea that was so absurd that he decided, you know what? I'm out. I'm out. And I think they should have been nicer to him. I think they should have done a lot better with him. And you know what? I think after that, they should have delayed it. They really should have delayed it. But the problem was, this was right after Batman versus Superman had embarrassed themselves. Well, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. Warner Bros. Had embarrassed themselves only a little while earlier when they delayed Dawn of Justice by almost a year to May 6th, 2016. And then they embarrassed themselves even further after they had to change the release date again because Marvel wanted to release Captain America Civil War that date. And I don't think Marvel was probably afraid we'll embarrass ourselves if we do this. Because originally it was supposed to come out in November 2015, and then they decided we'll change it to July. So, so after that, they really scrambled and they rushed, and they got a director who just wasn't good. A director who's directed movies in the past that have been critically panned. And you could really see where studio interference came in, and you could really see that. And that was part of the reason, but that's not the only reason why I hated it. I didn't hate it. I disliked it. I'm not going to say I hated it because there were things about this movie that had potential. Have your parents ever said to you, I'm sure when you were a kid, whenever you got in trouble, your parents said to you, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. That's how I felt about Ant-Man. I wasn't mad, I was disappointed. In fact, especially because I had friends who went to go see Ant-Man before I did. And they came out saying this movie's fantastic, this movie's amazing. You're going to love it. And I went into it with a really open mind. I go to every movie with an open mind, except for the new Ghostbusters, but that's only because Sony's been trying to make it look, has been trying to silence any legitimate criticisms or any female who talks about their new movie. And, you know, they've been trying to silence them and only let people who are legitimately racist and sexist comment stuff on their new trailer just to make it look like, you know, oh, all the hate for this movie is racist and sexist. But that's a story for another day. The problem with Ant-Man mainly was the fact that it just became boring after a while. It felt like, you know, at the very beginning, they did something. And then they did it again. And then they did it again. And then they did it again. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until it just became repetitive. Yeah. And after it becomes so repetitive, it just got so repetitive to a point where I just became uninterested in the movie. I really did. And by the end of the movie, I was just uninterested. I was uninvested. Now, the jokes, in my opinion, were not good. There were a few jokes here and there that got me, you know, that I chuckled a little bit about. The Baskin Robbins joke was funny, and the Thomas the Tank Engine thing was funny. And I think that's probably what made Thomas the Tank Engine a meme. But there was that. Also, but overall, I think the comedy was pushed way too far. For example, with what was it? Um, the whole oh yeah, Michael Pena. A lot of people loved this character. I didn't like his character, and I didn't like the characters that Scott worked with. I feel like they were just there for comedic value, you know. And I remember I looked up. There was a quote from years back, from like 2010, where Edgar Wright was still on the project, and he said it was going to be even though it was going to take place in the MCU, it was kind of going to be solo. It was going to be secluded from the MCU. I'm just going to check the battery for a second. Yeah, I got to plug my thing in. Hold on for 1 second, guys. You guys, I'm just plugging in my computer because the battery's kind of low. Or why don't I talk while I do this? So part of the problem was Edgar Wright had said in this interview that even though it was going to be more of a solo film, it was going to be secluded from the MCU. It wasn't just going to be about a bunch of references and superhero cameos and foreshadowing, like most of the other Marvel movies are. It was just going to be a solo movie, which makes sense. Well, right after they got rid of Edgar Wright, they were essentially, let me resume the show. They were essentially kicking off the one guy who knew what he was doing. And after that, it felt like Marvel was just confused. And because of that, they just added random cameos and references to hope that the audience would be happy. So I think that's why they had the Spider-Man reference at the very end, where they said, "Oh, there's a guy who can, swing around and do all this great stuff." That's also why I think, sorry, that's also why I think, they had the scene in, what was it? What was that scene? Let me think that. Oh yeah, it was the scene with Falcon. Falcon, yeah, the scene with Falcon and Ant-Man. That was one of the Screen Rant talked about it in a video recently. It was one of the most awkward scenes in a superhero movie to date, and I don't mean awkward in a good way. It felt like Marvel didn't know what they were doing, so that was just like, oh, okay, Falcon. Let's have Falcon. Yeah, we'll have Falcon. They'll love that. The fans will love that. And Captain America: Civil War. Oh, they'll have a post-credit scene that foreshadows that movie, since everybody's really excited about that movie. And at that point, there were no trailers for Civil War, and that was another problem. One of my biggest problems, though, was the protagonist. Well, mainly the characters. The characters were really not that good. The plot was subpar. The pacing and tone were all over the place. Well, it had a consistent tone. I think it's just the jokes about the tone that I didn't like. But I think the tone in general was very good. But the characters, it just felt like I couldn't invest myself in Scott's character, if you know what I mean. I think Scott Lang, was a character who just wasn't interesting. Now, I've read the comics. Scott Lang isn't an interesting character, and apparently Edgar Wright wanted to change him so he was an employee at Pym Particles, and they were still going to have his daughter, but it was going to be different. And I think it had Edgar Wright stayed on the project, I think he could have made Scott a much more interesting character. But in this, not only was he uninteresting, like in the comics, but I can't sympathize for him whatsoever. At least in the comics, he had a reason to steal. He had a reason, because in the comics, his daughter has a disease, and he has money issues, and because of that, because of all the money issues he has, he needs to steal. He needs to steal to get the money to help his daughter. Now, that's cliched and everything, but I could at least see that. In this, he steals because, well, I guess he is one of those Ron Paul supporters who thinks that the government is looking after all of us. Okay, but he still has a family. Why wouldn't you gave up everything? He should have known when he was doing that he had a family and he was giving up all that. So for that reason, I cannot sympathize for Scott. And another thing is, he had a chance. And I was watching a review of Ant-Man. Can't remember what the name of the guy who posted it was, but I recommend you guys go look it up. And he made a great point. Scott could have given up his life Scott had a chance. Scott had to come, he had a chance right after he got out of prison to rebuild his life. He really did. Even though the world was against him, he still had a chance. He still had a chance to do the impossible and get his family back together. And yes, I know it was the impossible, but his daughter still loved him, and he had a chance to at least rebuild his relationship with his daughter. And it would have been better if, Scott, if the conflict of the movie was the fact that Scott had to, fix the mistakes from the past, and then maybe the villain could have been somebody from his past that comes back, and the whole movie could have been, Scott fighting his problems from the past, his ghosts from the past. That would have been a much more compelling movie. I could have sympathized for Scott that way because, then think about it. We all make mistakes. We all slip up sometimes. We all make mistakes. And sometimes we make bigger mistakes than we should. We're all humans. Sometimes we make mistakes that have, not that big impact. Maybe we might get punished for those mistakes, but maybe not in the best way. But then there are those certain people who are unlucky that make those one mistakes that just ruin their lives forever. And that should have been what Ant-Man was about. They should have said, Scott Lang is this one man who makes one mistake and the whole world is against him. And he could try to rebuild, and the whole movie could have been him, fighting the odds, fighting the fact that, that the world is against him, trying to rebuild a relationship with his daughter, because that was all he wanted. Um, and I think that would have been a much more compelling movie. But no, they didn't go with that. Scott, after Scott has a great chance to rebuild a relationship with his daughter, what does he do? Oh, he goes back with his crew of, thugs and criminals. And why didn't Hank just call him up and say, hey, I realized, man, that man, I realized that you are this great heist guy, and I think you got a great chance of doing this. And how come out of all the people in the world, Hank just happens to choose Scott to be the successor, the all-powerful Ant-Man? Um, I mean, why didn't he just choose like a retired cop or somebody to be the new Ant-Man? He could have that could have helped him. But no, the movie explains, they do the cliched Hollywood thing, the cliched, oh, we need to get the underdog, we need to get the Rocky of all movies to be the new superhero. He's the chosen one. He may seem like a little man now, but soon he will rise to greatness. There is truly greatness in his future, and that the protagonist wanted him because he was testing him and because he could sympathize with him, because he could relate to him, and he made mistakes and he didn't want that person, to the underdog, to make the same mistakes that he did. It's a cliched Hollywood gimmick, and they went with it. That's exactly what they went with, and it completely sucked. It made absolutely no sense. Another thing, what's her name? Oh yeah, this movie completely screwed over the Wasp. The Wasp is a great character, and they completely screwed her over in this movie. Um, Instead they had Hope, who was the daughter of Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym. And first of all, they did the cliched, oh, your mother risked her life saving the world. Oh, I have a friend on Instagram, and you guys really ought to go follow him if you're a fan of the Punisher. His name is War Punisher. That's his Instagram name. He's great. He's a great guy. He's really nice. Um, and he writes a lot of fan fictions about the Punisher from time to time. And there was this really, really great one where the Punisher, he has Frank Castle has cancer, and he he's dying, and he goes to this one priest, and he confesses his sins, and then at the very end they kind of imply that he dies. And it's a great fan fiction. Somebody pointed this out in the comment section. It was a great fan fiction. It was a short one, but a very, very powerful one, because it shows that not all superheroes die risking their lives to save the world. Some heroes just die. I know a lot of people hated the movie American Sniper. I thought it was an amazing movie. And I think Chris Kyle is, a genuine hero. But one of the great things about the movie is the fact that the ending, his wife, Chris Kyle's wife, worries while he's gone that he will one day die in the field of battle. And, and she worries about that every day. And she keeps telling him, why are you doing this? Why do you continue to do this? You could die. You could end up dying. And then he finally comes home. Then he finally says, you know what? I'm done with this. You're right. I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna come home. And he he suffers PTSD for a little while, but he recovers from it. He goes to the VA, and he eventually recovers from it by um he recovers by helping other veterans who have PTSD. And eventually, what happens is he gets killed while he's at home. You think it's all over. You think he's dodged he's jumped over every obstacle. He's avoided every obstacle that's coming his way. He survived war. He's come home. Now he can live a great life with his family. Nothing bad can happen. Gets killed while he's at home. Somebody ends up murdering him. And the thing is, first of all, it shows that any day can be your last. That's the first thing. And second of all, again, it shows that he doesn't die, single-handedly, you know, saving, saving the world. He he just dies while he's at home trying to help a single person. It's beautiful when you really think about it, because again, the anti-climax to it is just chilling. Um, and Also, American Sniper. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because my grandfather died last year, and that was the last movie I went to go see with him before he died. But again, that ending just shows how chilling the anticlimax of it is. That's what I think they should have done with Ant-Man. But no, they came up with the cliched. What a savior this person is. And Hope Van Dyne, we have to talk about her too. She was extremely unlikable. And there's a whole video somebody made about the fact that she just whines about the fact that she's not the new Ant-Man. And this is a character with so much potential. And you know what? I'm not gonna lie. When I saw the hashtag Janet Van Crime hashtags going around, I thought this is ridiculous. But you know what? I can immediately say hashtag Janet Van Crime now, because I feel this was a crime against the character. Um, but yeah, and so I felt that Ant-Man had unlikable characters you couldn't invest in, characters who were um really not that, who were either unlikable or just underdeveloped. And yeah, they were just disappointing, underwhelming characters, and it's really sad to think about. Especially one character. Look, we can disagree. You can disagree with everything I said, but there's one thing that I think, and you can disagree with me on this, but I haven't seen really anybody who's disagreed with me on this one part of it yet. The villain sucked, in my opinion, and I've seen most people, even people who love the movie, admit that the villain sucked. Um, I felt absolutely no attachment to the villain whatsoever. Um, the villain had no motivations. He went crazy for no reason. Um, it just, made Marvel, look even more embarrassing when it came to, establishing supervillains. So, in my opinion, Ant Man was an overrated movie, and that's just my opinion on it. I think, just like with Iron Man 3, I probably rambled on way too long about this movie. So, let's continue to the next movie Iron Man 2. Now, a lot of you probably think this movie should have been lower on the list. Um, the thing about Iron Man 2 is I can see why everybody hates this movie. And now here's the thing. Hold on just a second, guys. Guys, I'm gonna have to end the stream right now. But I will be back to do a part two. I didn't want to do a part two. I wanted this to be a whole thing, but I'm gonna have to save it until later. So yeah, guys. So I'm gonna end the stream now, but I'll be back. So don't worry. I'll be back as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say.